Hello, welcome to Warblog. Today we're going to look at the recapture of Bucha, which is a Ukrainian counterattack on from Kiev into Bucha. I've done 18 minutes of this video and then I sort of messed up, and so I want to just sort of showed a few things I didn't want to be shown, and I don't want to edit things. Just a few things. Firstly, I sort of spent a few minutes talking about this. I'll go through it again. I've called it the Ukraine Special Operation now, instead of the Russia-Ukraine war. I've sort of done that deliberately because I think that there's a lot of bias in the sense that it's a war and there is only one solution for the war, and that's for the West to go in and save the Ukrainians. And that's going to be a global war. It's going to be World War III and possibly a nuclear war. And I think that one thing that everyone can do to de-escalate the situation is to call it the Russia or the Ukraine Special Operation, and start thinking, when are the Russians going to conclude their special operation in the Ukraine? Start talking about it like that. It is a form of de-escalation, in my opinion, because all this talk about war, a lot of people that don't really understand things, they just think, right, well, Russia's declared war. Well, they haven't. They've gone in for a special operation. That's how they're viewing it. And so we can at least have the intelligence to, leverage that in the potential of being able to say, well, when is your special operation going to be over? How can we expedite the completion of this special operation? It's a difficult situation, but the thing is, I think that by sending, they're encouraging people to go to the Ukraine, and now they're sort of putting a caveat, oh, you need some military experience, but all of that is just wrong, because to start off with, I was reading a Twitter thing that if you go there and you don't have like the proper Ukrainian military uniform, you get very few rights under whatever rules of war there are, the Geneva Convention and all these things. I don't really understand it, but apparently if you just go there with your own kit, you don't have any rights. They can sort of do things like shoot you, on other grounds, for spying, espionage, sabotage. You don't get the same protection under the rules of war, etc. These are just little things. But anyway, I talked a bit about it. I don't want to go any further than that. I'm calling it a special operation now because I do think that de-escalates things, and you can start sort of asking your political representative, your MP, your Congress people, what is the status of the Russian special operation? Have you, because no one's asking what has Putin said about the determination and the culmination and the objectives of the special operation. Will he finish it as soon as he's taken eastern Ukraine or just Kiev, or is there something that the Ukrainian Zelensky, whatever his name is, can do to expedite the end of the special operation? Because he just seems to be fueling war. And he's even saying things like after Ukraine it's going to be Poland, and I think that is actually incendious, inflammatory, or it's provocative, and it's actually not. I don't think he's a good leader. He seems to be, he's not addressed the consideration of this being a special operation, and has not really given us any sort of clear indication of what negotiations they're doing. And I think these things should be clear on the line, because a lot of lives are at risk. A lot of people can be affected, because if this goes into a global war and there are nuclear bombs, and we're all going to be talking about radiation poisoning for the next 10 years. And something, calling it a special operation, I think, is something that people can do. But anyway, I'm going to get into this. I started to play this, and and then I realised I hadn't done something, so I started again anyway. So basically, what we're looking at is sort of this as a sort of model and simulation, not of really what's happening, but what could be happening. And so I'm sort of thinking, well, they've taken Bucha, so so how did they take Bucha? And to start with, I was talking about how amazed I was that the Ukrainians have managed to keep so much hardware in Kiev And so sort of, the question of where's that hardware being kept and how are they managing to inflict these casualties. And I think that the conclusion was, to some extent, well, drones are easy to keep. So these are Turkish drones. So I've given them their own sort of Turkish drones, which are apparently quite good. They've done well in the Middle East, but they weren't up against a sort of a major power. But even against Russia, they apparently are doing quite well. And I'm sort of thinking, well, maybe that's how they're doing it. But I did quite a lot more with the artillery. And then that was it. So I'm going to speed things up and just get through what I did before. So we're doing some drone strikes. I'm targeting this infantry unit, and well, I got 0.7 before. This time I got nothing. So this is going to be a different outcome. If I get 1.5, I'll be balanced. No, but 0.6. So we've done some damage there, and then we get some artillery coming in there. We got 2 last time, so let's see what we can do this time. 2.3, okay. Well, we'll maybe. Well, we're sort of pretty much. Yeah, well, it's pretty much exactly the same. It was about 5.4, so it's slightly down, but so we're in the same situation. And the dialogue and discussion that I was sort of, talking about was, now what you got here is 50%, which is what it was pretty much last time, of this unit's been destroyed. And so when you consider that, you sort of think, well, that would give us some indication as to why we're seeing so many, blown up vehicles. Because we're in the early stages of the war where both sides have got a lot of firepower, and this is indirect fire that we just saw on drones working. There's no way that the Russians could have gone in there and eliminated all drone risks, all drone sort of enemy combatant drones. So whilst those are at large, there's going to be things like that, and that would be a photo shoot, in South Bucha. It's no real declaration or determination of the overall military situation. They've also got their artillery. So the thing is, what I said last time is, well, how do we maybe tweak this to represent what we might think is happening, if we're trying to get our heads around it? And we can say things like, well, maybe they've got more drones. So how about instead of having 2, we've got 20? We can maybe have destroyed everything there. And so we can then maybe see, well, what the Russians need to do is to somehow up their air defences. Now, I've got 1 air defence unit there. So again, we can start sort of tweaking things. This is why I've just left sort of bare bones token units, so we can start to sort of say, well, we know what air defence is. How about if we upped it so that all the drones were killed? So is that what Russia's doing? I mean, have they been? It's all about sort of allocating resources and things like that, but also the question of how these things are being done, because they certainly probably don't have large tank companies left in Kiev. But this is all really just to sort of get a balance of things. And then what I did, I actually moved things forward, not in any particular sort of way, just for next turn. And then I pressed end turn. This is pretty much where I was. And then I realized I hadn't given the Russians any air power. End turn, come on. Yeah, so we've now got air power. And I've given the Russians a bit more air power. But what we've got here, obviously, we've got rockets, and I've upped their rocket loads as well. So we've got 3 lots of rockets. So these are sort of things like the Grads. These are obviously drones. We imagine they've got. I don't really know much about them. I know they've got some anti-drone technology, but I could encompass it under electronic warfare. But I don't have that in here, or even in the system really. I've given them this Su-24 to represent air power. We don't really know how much of that they're using. One thing I've totally forgotten is any air defence on, and I'm not going to start this again. But yeah, I should really go in and add some air defence now for the Ukrainians. And helicopters. So I don't know what to start with really. I mean, we could sort of say, well, let's do 1 rocket attack, because we're not really looking to sort of say who's going to win here. We're just looking at sort of, what are the primary elements that are happening. As we haven't made a conflict yet, we haven't made contact. So both sides have got a lot of firepower. So let's see what we can do here against. Let's target this. Well, let's target this. I don't really know what to target. Let's go for this because they're nearest. Or this. Oh, I don't know. Right, let's just do this because it seems like the easiest. no effect. So all that grad rocket launching had no effect on their military unit at that location, but it probably caused a lot of building damage and a lot of photo opportunities. Point 8. And 1.7. So they're 25% loss. So they're not making morale checks yet, but there's probably smoke, fire, some building damage, coming from this little square. But all the rest of their forces are still intact. So they've still got defensive capabilities. But the thing is, what we've seen there, say in the news reports, is lots of rocket fire going off, lots of explosions, but without really realizing that the vast majority of the city has not been touched. It's still, as it was. And Kiev is a large place, and so we've still got this large line. But we've got our drones as well, so our drones might want to come in and do some precision attacks on their tanks. So let's see how our drones work on this armored column. Point 9, point 6, point 9. So we've basically taken 25% of that armored unit out. So there's probably not as much building damage, there's probably not as much smoke, but there's probably quite a few tanks burning on the side of the road, etc. Following that. So we've got two areas of sort of, smoke and damage and photo opportunities, etc. So we might want to sort of also target their artillery with our air power. Now remember, we haven't got any air defense in here, so it's just because I didn't remember. So we've managed to actually do quite a bit of damage. And now the next thing really is to sort of consider our helicopters. So we've got these helicopters that go out and do rocket strikes. Now I have seen some interesting footage of a low-level rocket strike against sort of a convoy of tank carriers on Twitter. So we've got to sort of say, well, what do we want to do? And I think if we went against the artillery, we'd probably be able to take them out. But I don't think that's really fair in the sort of the sense of what we're playing here at the moment. So I think, we can almost choose it randomly. But I think we'll go for these two outside elements, one on each. We're not going to do much damage, but I just want to sort of look at it, say, to consider. So no effect there. And 0.6 there. So we've had this sort of front line, and nothing is engaged yet. Nothing is touched, and everything has been indirect fire. So it's a war at this stage of indirect area fire or direct precision munition in the case of the drones. So artillery and rockets and drones, aircraft and helicopters, carrying out these sorts of strikes and things. So at the moment, there's not been any sort of major battles. They've not sort of, there's not been any sort of tank on tank or sort of major assaults. But it's now the Ukrainian turn. So obviously they've taken Bucha. So if we assume that that was their first thing, now we know that they're at 40% now, or 4. We've got this unit here that we might want to pepper up as well. So if we put our drones on that and then decide afterwards where we want to put our artillery. No effect. Now remember, we could sort of say, no, what would it be like if we actually had more drones? So we're not trying to, it's not representing or simulating the actualities of the situation. It's just giving us sort of some ideas, because you could sort of say, well, if we had lots more rockets, much more, if we had more drones, we would be able to do more. So we're bearing that in mind. But I really want to sort of maybe, do some damage on that front unit there. So we've done 0.6 and no effect. So it's been fairly disappointing, really. Could have done, got those up to 50 as well. So what we're now going to do is Okay, well, he's going to be pinned from that. He didn't get anything, so we could have done it that way. So we messed up there, but it's just tough. So we're now going to try and take this position. I don't think it's going to be good odds, but let's see what happens. An exchange. So there's now lots of battles there. And this guy is pinned. He's not going to go against that. So that's the end of that position. Now, I'm not going to take that any further because I think that the Russians are really going to probably be able to push back because these are all in the open. They've got multiple units. They'll be able to pounding a lot of rockets. So what we can say is, well, what was the situation in Bucha? Maybe the Russians didn't have as much of the air power that we've given them. Maybe the Ukrainians had more air defense, which reduced the willingness of the Russians to use their helicopters and aircraft. Maybe they only used their drones, and maybe they lost 50% of their drones, etc., etc. So I just thought I'd run through that because I don't want to spend sort of an hour. Bear in mind I've lost 20 minutes on previous video. I think it's sort of it sheds a bit of light and it's quite interesting. I don't really know much more to say really because I don't want to just sort of keep talking. I mean, obviously there's going to be more situations to look at and to consider. I think the Fearsome one is something that the Mariupol situation, I think I've done a bit of that, but that's sort of ongoing. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much that really. Yeah, I don't really know much more to say really because I don't want to sort of just start warbling on. Obviously, the thing is, I think obviously it's a bad situation, but I just don't really want to sort of think and consider it any differently to Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. We're looking at and considering those things, and from my point of view, it puts it into perspective because it does seem a lot different, and it seems that there's so much more sort of Twitterism, and it in my mind's eye, it really does represent how sinister the press and the media is. I'm trying to be careful about what I say because they're truly treating it very differently and in a dangerous sense. And no one wants war, and no one wanted war in the Middle East either. And I'm getting a lot of these tweets where they say, oh, this was a picture of Baghdad being bombed. This was a picture of Libya, Tripoli being bombed, and no one cared. And this is a picture of Ukraine being bombed, and all of a sudden the world's gone up its own arsehole. And I really sympathise with that attitude, and so I think it's important to sort of keep a level head, so to speak, and just model it and to consider each event as it happens, which is what I tend to do. But I think that I've not really experienced anything, but I think that it sort of do get this sort of sense that we should be sort of boo-hooing a lot more. But obviously, it's as in any situation, it's very sad for the people that are now sort of think they can't tweet anymore. They can't. I don't do a lot of tweeting, but they're not doing the things that they were. I was watching I think it's the Economist video. It seemed quite a reasonable video, but again, he didn't really mention that some of the important things, like it's a special operation. But he said that basically nothing is open anymore in Kiev. The only things are a few supermarkets and chemists for people getting prescriptions. But he said, but basically most people have actually left. And it's pretty much an empty city, and all that gives you some sort of idea and perspective on what's happening. But yeah, I mean, there are thousands of people that were doing really normal things 2 weeks ago, and I mean, a week ago they were doing normal things. They were catching buses. They're possibly a little stressed, but they probably didn't really think that Russia would invade. They probably just thought it was more of this sort of political hot air that we always get. And yeah, so they're really, really upset. So we know that. But I think just to leave it, again, just to reinforce, my own, I'd say I don't want to sort of do all these things. Oh, we should do this, or protest this or protest that. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with protesting. But I think people are sort of thinking, well, what should I do? And I was thinking just the other day, there's probably a lot of people that don't even know the war. They're just not even following it at all. They're just not even looking at the media. They're just not only disenfranchised, but they just didn't look at it anyway. They gave up probably years ago, and they're still doing their lives normally. I mean, talking about in other countries. Probably people in Russia just sort of think, oh yeah, that's that stuff over there. People in Africa, Canada, whatever, Brazil, they're probably just thinking, oh, okay, yeah, just like we would in other situations. But I think that if you do feel that there's something that you can do, I think this is something that everyone can do, is to start calling it a special operation. Because one thing that these media people are doing, and I know I've said this, I don't want to sort of just repeat it boringly, but I don't know how much I said it because I finished my first video and then deleted it. But it de-escalates just the rhetoric, and you can de-escalate the rhetoric by not contributing to it, but not mistakenly considering, because everyone's telling you it's a war, that it is a war. It's not. It's an occupying force that has gone in there, met a lot of resistance because Zelensky has said it's a war. And you could be sort of saying, well, instead of saying how can we end the war, because obviously ending the war is probably only going to be done with superior force. So I mean, when I think about it, I think, well, what the West are going to do is to wait until Russia has exhausted itself, say after a month of fighting, and then launch an attack, which will cause a global war with a nuclear exchange. So what I'm hoping is that Putin will finish his special operation within the next few days. They said it was going to take, they would be done by the 4th of March, and now I'm hearing that their plans were a 12-day campaign. Putin can save this by ending his special operation, obviously by ending what they're calling the war. But it is a special operation, and he can conclude it by saying, we've done what we consider in the interests of humanity. We are going to stop. We're not going to have any more further sort of ground taking, but we are going to hold and defend, and anyone attacks us will receive fire back. But they can pull out now and prevent the worst of the worst. But if you think about it as a special operation, I mean, that is what they do in special operations. That's what they did in Lebanon. They went in and they came out. That's what they do in Gaza. They went in and they came out. It's what we did in Afghanistan. It took 20 years to come out, but they didn't try to make it another part of the United States, etc., etc. I feel quite boring just repeating all of that, but it is a sort of it's one of the things, and no one really watches my videos, but I do feel that I have a voice to some extent, and I sort of think, well, what happens if I listen to this in 5 years' time, and I think, well, what did I do? And you sort of think, well, maybe I should go over there and fight. And well, I just I think that was actually not a good idea. I think it's a sort of a thing that sort of conjures up a lot of sort of self doubt as to whether you would or you wouldn't, or whether you're scared to fight or whether you would fight, because there's a lot of people leaving the Ukraine. So I think, well, why don't you stay and fight? And then you think about it the other way, and this. So I've got no comment on that really, from a personal perspective. But I think that when you look at about sort of think, well, what did you do or what could you do? So I've seen protests for the Palestinian issue in major cities. I've seen them, and also Chinese occupation of certain areas, and you just walk past them because you're going to the shops or a bar or something, and you just walk past them and sort of think, oh, these idiots waving flags and shouting through megaphones. You sort of think, well, the Palestinian cause is actually quite important for them, and they've probably come back and got relatives that are dead, and so people might think, well, what can I do? And I'm going to protest. Well, do you really think that's going to change anything? I think calling it a special operation and trying to enforce it and trying to reset the dialogue is actually something that can be done. It might sound stupid, but I think it's actually something that can be done and would de-escalate things, because there is a war of rhetoric and you can actually play a part of that. And I'm not saying that you should take it any further by denouncing whoever you think is the wrong person, continually tweeting and liking and, in theory, unliking, but you can't unlike things. But I think there are a lot of people just retweeting and making comments and doing things and making videos relentlessly, and there's really no point. But I think that whatever what I've just said there is, so I'll leave it at that, and I will speak to you later. Cheerio.